You are listening to Sober Motivation Radio. All right, guys, welcome to the second episode of Sober Motivation. And today I want to talk to you guys about basically the idea that Alcoholics Anonymous is the only avenue that you have for going into sobriety, which I believe is not true at all, in that you can use different tools for sobriety. So for me personally, I found that AA was good for starting out, in that there are a lot of people that are involved in Alcoholics Anonymous, but for me personally, this is my recovery. And so I think that if you guys are in the same process of trying to be clean and sober and stay motivated to do that and not continuously drink and avoid that alcohol on a daily basis, I think it's important that you realize that it's your recovery and you aren't accountable to Alcoholics Anonymous. You aren't accountable to the 12 steps. While they are tools that you can use for sobriety, I think that at the end of the day, it's just whatever it takes for you to be sober. So it doesn't matter if you drink to AA. It really only matters to you yourself. So one of the reasons why I figured that out for myself was that I thought I found somebody who was somebody who would be a reasonable sponsor for me, and he wanted to hook up, and I thought I was all over it because I was like, all right, I see where this guy's going. He gave a speech about what he was doing on his path to sobriety, and I got a text from him afterwards because I was at work and I couldn't call anyone, and he wanted his phone call to him on the dot. So I was still at work. I shot him a text, and he came back, and he was pretty upset at the idea of me not giving him a phone call. So I thought about it for a second, and I had to realize for me on a day-to-day basis to not drink, it's to me to not drink. It's for me to not drink, not for somebody else to not drink. So that's where I found the idea of AA to be good, but it's not the only tool. And so I kind of just have found myself invested into different projects of my life, which this is currently one of them, building this brand called Sober Motivation and finding different things that I can use on a daily basis to just enjoy life and realize that I don't need alcohol to enjoy it. And so there's just been so many different things that I've been up to that have definitely helped me with maintaining sobriety. I remember in my early stages of sobriety, I found myself diving into fiction for once. So normally I stay away from things like Netflix and things like video games even. There's only maybe one video game I'll play on PlayStation, which is some Grand Theft Auto. But I actually spent some time watching all of the Star Wars movies. And I bought the DC online DC animated movie set, and I was watching all of the animated movies because, believe it or not, some of them are actually really deep, and I found that I could relate to some of the movies quite a bit in that, you know, there's a lot of internal struggles as well as the external struggles that they deal with in the DC universe. So watching somebody like Superman struggle with external monsters and demons that he was struggling with, for instance, like Doomsday, and fighting that external fight. So I feel like if you're in a position where you're trying to maintain sobriety and motivation, you know, that can definitely look like doomsday for a lot of people. And so watching my heroes struggle and overcome their villains in their lives and their demons in their lives was, for me, motivating in staying sober. And in these films, they don't talk about AA at all. There's no such thing as Alcoholics Anonymous in DC or Star Wars. And similarly to the DC relation that I found myself watching Star Wars, all 6 of the movies. And actually, I did watch the newest ones that came out also, the new ones with Kylo Ren and such. And I found myself hooking up with people online who are passionate about Star Wars, and just spending time sober, of course, just learning about what that is for myself, and seeing how people just have time to spend on these things. And it was interesting for me because the time that I was spending before was just in drinking in general. So I get to learn about the Star Wars community quite a bit. And before, I didn't really have any passion or interest in it, but I came across a 12-step program from the Jedi community, which is actually amazing. And I'm actually going to pull that up for you guys in a second. Hold on. All right, so I pulled it up on the internet. I did a quick Google search, and I got the 12-step from the dailyjedi.com. Shout out to them and credits to them. But I know the Alcoholics Anonymous has their own traditional 12-step program that they use. But this one starts out, and it has 12 steps to it also. This one says, Step 1, became aware that we suffer and have fallen prey to the insanity of the dark side through alcoholism and addiction. And then it gives a brief summary about the first step, and it says, Darth Vader was never completely lost to the dark side. No one ever really is. Shards of the past brief glimpses of who and what he was reminded Darth Vader that deep within him still resided Anakin Skywalker. And then it goes on to say, the first stage of recovery is admission that we have a major problem. As humans, we all suffer. The cause of all suffering is grasping attachment. Alcoholism is a form of unbridled attachment and ego run riot. To a sane and healthy person, the alcoholic appears quite insane. Through admission, we see it too. Only through admission can we learn to let go of our attachments and start a process of ego deflation. Recovery starts with accepting that there is a problem, but there is also still a way out. And then it goes on into step 2. Step 2, came to believe in the Force. We realize that the light side is the Jedi to redemption and recovery. And then it says, step 2, became willing to believe in a higher power can restore us to sanity. I'll go on to step 3. Step 3, became willing to accept the Jedi path and surrendered our lives to the Force. So I really like this 12-step program in particular because for me, I'm not religious. I don't really come from a really strong religious background. So for me to kind of get the idea of a power or something like a God to me was really hard to really say to myself, okay, I certainly without any question or doubt believe that there is some sort of God out there. So this path was cool for me to think about, because the way I think about it, metaphysics is something that I've had some brief education on, in that the sort of energy that you put out is the sort of energy that you get back in. And to uh, say you're on the Jedi path and surrendering your life to the Force, it was pretty amazing for me to think about, and I still like the idea of it. I still use that as if I need to use a grounding technique to say that there's a higher power in my life. It's funny for me to just be like, yeah, the Force, so something like thinking of myself as a Jedi and that I'm using the Force for my sobriety is I laugh about it a little bit because I think it's pretty funny to think about, but I think it's still a powerful tool that if you're having some struggle with finding your higher power, that this is one way you might be able to think about finding your higher power. Maybe Star Wars is something that can help you with that if you think that you need the 12-step program for your sobriety and you're not too sure about what Alcoholics Anonymous is. And there's actually a lot of different 12-step programs. So from my understanding, and I saw this posted from somebody a little bit ago. I'll go and pull that up also real quick. So I pulled it up. This particular document was provided to me from somebody else who I communicated with in the Jedi community, who brought up the various different 12-step programs that are available. So, and there's a whole bunch of different titles to them. One of them is called Gabe's 12 Steps. There's Beyond Belief Agnostics, another 12-step program. And I'll attach this to the description of this podcast. So you guys, if you want to keep it on hand and look at it, you guys can definitely do that. There's We Agnostics, Humanist 12 Steps, the 12 Steps of Realistic Recovery, SOS, White Bison. This one is cool. It's a Native American 12-step program that each step is not it's not spelled out specifically. This one's got just one word for each step. So step 1 for the White Bison recovery program is 1, honesty, 2, hope, 3, faith, 4, courage, 5, integrity, 6, willingness, 7, humility, 8, forgiveness, 9, justice, 10, perseverance, 11, spiritual awakening, and then the last step is community or service, actually. So that's pretty interesting. And then they have a Buddhist 12-step program. They have a Islamic 12-step program, free thinker steps, Gabe's again. So there's a bunch of different 12-step programs where people kind of took, I think, what was the original 12-step program and just reinterpreted it so that other people can use it for their own benefit and ultimately stay sober, because I think that's actually the most important thing, is that you do what you can to stay healthy. And so that's really what this episode of this podcast is about, is just understanding that you don't have to stick to any one thing for sobriety. And I think that's one of the other big reasons why I developed the brand, or I'm developing this brand called Sober Motivation, in that it's not going just as the name Alcoholics Anonymous, because I know people need help in different areas of staying sober from different addictions. And so it's something that I think this community can grow in learning and sharing about. So I want to go back into the 12-step program from the dailyjedi.com. Again, shout out to them. So they, I think I stopped off at step 3. It says, became willing to accept the Jedi path and surrendered our lives to the Force. Step 4, willing to confront our inner dark side. We entered our personal dark side cave without fear or hesitation. And then step 5, it goes on to say, emerging from the dark side cave anew, we admitted our past wrongs and faults to ourselves, to another, and to the force. And then step 6 says, we then became willing to let go of our past wrongs and faults. Important, I think, definitely. Step 7, we finally let go of our past wrongs and faults, leaving them behind. Step 8, we made a list of those we had harmed in the past and became willing to make amends, similar still to the original AA 12-step program. And then it goes into step 9. We made amends to those we had harmed, except when to do so would injure them or others. Where we have been harmed by others, we forgive. We also made self-amends and forgave ourselves. Step 10, training daily, we sought to always improve ourselves physically, mentally, and spiritually. When we made mistakes, we admitted them immediately and made amends if possible. And then step 11, meditating daily, we sought to increase our knowledge of the Force so that it might lead to realization of peace, harmony, and serenity in our lives and in the lives of others. And then step 12, having learned to live as a Jedi, as a result of these steps, we continue to apply the Jedi Code in all aspects of our lives, putting our own life in home in order first, seeking world betterment through self-betterment. We continue to walk the path. On our journey, we supported others and helped those who sought our aid where we could. So I really like the Jedi Code 12-step in particular. And they actually have their own code that they put together that they've got actually an official religion behind them. The Jedi Code says there's no emotion, there's peace, there's no ignorance, there's knowledge, there's no passion, there's serenity, there is no chaos, there is harmony, there is no death, there is the Force. And so I really like the community, believe it or not. I like I said, it had only really started digging into the Star Wars path after I became sober and started learning what that community was about. I've come into quite a few of these people, and I've actually reached out to another one. They were called the Jedi Blog podcast, so I'm looking to hopefully make an appearance on their show pretty soon. And I'm looking forward to doing that and talking to them and getting some more information from them, and hopefully give a little bit more of a shout out for myself with this show, because I think it's great to start working on this finally and sharing my experience in sobriety and what I'm doing to stay sober in the process. So, and then there's other things that you guys can do for your sobriety. And I think the other main thing that has really benefited me also has been just really not having my mind on the idea of drinking again in general. So, for instance, doing this podcast has been a lot of help. Getting the Sober Motivation brand together has been a lot of help, because knowing that I'm working on it on a constant basis, it pretty much removes the idea of drinking to me, because I don't have the time for it to make this as successful as I'd like it to be, and for it to stand for what I want it to stand for. And like I said earlier, I was on a probation period for drinking, and that probation period ends soon, and just having the clarity of thought and the feeling of just being sober has been what I've been just waiting for, to fight this ugly fight of addiction, and I finally feel like I've, for once, started to get the upper hand on the idea of addiction. And I told myself this also when I was going to get over this struggle that I was having with drinking, in that once I could get away from it, that I was going to fight this disease and do everything I can against it, because it's just disgusting for what it does to people, just to have a chemical dependency on alcohol, or if you have a chemical dependency on drugs. I mean, I've lost more people than I can count on both my hands to people overdosing on drugs, and people committing suicide from alcohol abuse as well. And so for myself to actually be here, be sober, and be able to talk to you guys, this is where I stand to fight for that very cause and reason, because it's just too ugly for me to just let it go unchecked. So that's where I find the motivation to do this podcast, is for the people who are still struggling with it themselves and that need the help themselves to go against this addiction or disease that they're facing. So that was pretty much the point of this whole podcast, to just really let you guys know that when you get sober, that, and this was something that I realized for me, was that recovery is for you. It's not for somebody else. It's not for AA, for instance. It's not for even the Jedi community. It's for you to be alive and live your life. And I think that's the other thing that I really like about doing this podcast, and actually having this name for it, sober motivation, because sober to me is not just being abstained from alcohol or drug abuse. It's really living in truth and being in that moment of serenity and feeling good about yourself in life in general. So that's kind of where I'm drawing some, I feel, long-term growth for this channel, in that you're not just going to be going into the idea of not drinking. There's going to be other things that I have in the future coming up for you guys. I have a nice partnership with this app and this program called Blinkist, which I'll actually leave an affiliate link in this as well, on top of the different 12-step programs also that you guys can follow. This particular app is fantastic to sign up for. I highly, highly recommend it. I am affiliated with them, but they offer great value for people who just have a knack for just wanting to constantly learn about anything in general. So if you want to learn about investing or business or any of that, then you can definitely do that. And I'm looking at actually using that as part of a content creator for this podcast as well. So I'm looking at doing weekly reviews on the particular books that I've read, and particular just different things I've picked up that I think are worth talking about, because I definitely have a list of books that I've gotten from this app. Like I said, it's hard for me to not promote it, because for me it's such a great app, but it is fantastic. And let me just tell you, I've got already a list of books that I'm ready to talk about with you guys. So that is it for this episode. I hope you guys like the idea of just understanding that you guys aren't trapped to one idea of sobriety, and that you guys explore your options and really make sure what you're doing for your sobriety is working for you in the long term. So thank you. Thanks for listening to this episode of Sober Motivation Radio. If you're not subscribed already, please be sure to do that right now. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love it if you could do me a quick favor and rate and review the podcast. This lets the platform know that I'm doing something right and people like the content. It would be a huge help, and I would be grateful. Be sure to head over to sobermotivation.com and pick up the Sober Motivation ebook. This book will teach you about sobriety, motivation, maintaining sobriety, and motivation. Also, what would be some of the key things that you can do afterwards when becoming sober so that you can maintain the positive attitude to stay motivated and sober. Until next time, stay sober and stay motivated.